Okay, now we're actually going to get started. So today we're going to go ahead and get started on some new material. So if we go over to weekly exercise 4, the residence, we're going to click on the residence part 4, and that will give us our new material. Okay, so for a quick review, I'm actually going to skip the review of the title block, but what I'd like to talk about really quickly is do a review of witness lines. Okay, I want to make sure that everyone understands what witness lines are and how you can use them efficiently. Okay, so anybody really quickly, witness lines, can maybe just describe me what they are? Witness lines.
The detail line?
They're actually, let's see, I may have actually not used this term in the past, but what witness lines are the little blue dimension lines that you see when you're editing your walls and your windows, okay? And those are the dimensions that you can click on and actually will ultimately affect your what it is that you're working on, okay? So if we go to a floor plan like so, and I click on, any wall, actually, let me change this to, okay, so let's say you click on one of these walls, these orange these blue, the blue leader lines that you see with these dimensions, these are called witness lines. Okay, that's the technical term for those. I may have not been calling them by that, but we're certainly all familiar with seeing those. We've all seen them as you're drawing, but how do we use them efficiently? Okay, so a lot of times you guys might be drawing and you're wondering why what it is that you're drawing doesn't correspond to what you see here on the screen. That can be a little frustrating, I understand that, but these lines can become very powerful if you know how to use them correctly, okay? So let's say for this particular, when drawing these walls, if I want to make this wall right here 8 feet from the outside face of stud of this wall to the outside face of stud of this wall. Well, one thing to keep in mind that when you see these dimensions, notice where the leader lines are being taken to. You'll notice right here that these leader lines are going to the center line of these walls over here. So I actually have 8 feet from center line to center line, which is not what I'm ultimately after. Maybe it is for you, maybe it's not, okay? But I want to make sure that this is 8 feet from the outside face of stud to the outside face of stud, okay? So what you can do is you can go over to these witness lines, and you could click on the little blue dot, and that will toggle where the witness lines dimension to, okay? So I will usually toggle them so that I now have the outside face of stud. I can go to this side and do the same thing to know that, just to make sure that I have it as 8 feet, okay? And so I've confirmed that my dimension is correct, okay? And let's just say that we want to make it 9 feet. You can click on that blue dimension, type in 9 feet, and it will change it accordingly. Remember that when you are moving, or when you're moving your walls, the wall that will move is always the one that is what? Highlighted. It's highlighted, the one that's always highlighted. So if you want a particular wall to move, make sure that the one that is, once you punch in that dimension, make sure the one that you want to move is actually selected, okay? Any questions about witness lines? That makes good sense. So a couple more things. Let me just go back to 8 feet. Okay. Let's see. What was I going to say? Another option that you might have to do is the witness lines may not be dimensioning to the object that you want. Okay. So when you click on these walls, Revit usually always tries to interpret what it is that you're dimensioning to. Half the time it's probably correct. Half the time it's probably not. Okay, so like right here, I get some kind of funky dimensions. It's trying to, dimension it from the center of this wall, and then it also does it to the center of this wall. But let's just say maybe I actually want the dimension to maybe this wall up here. Okay, so if I click on that wall, I can actually take those lines, or those witness lines, and I could drag it out to another location. So if it's not dimensioning to a location that you want, you can always drag the witness lines to the correct dimension. And then from there, you can click on the little toggles, and you can get them to the locations that you want. Okay, so you should always be able to dimension to the actual object that you're trying to reference. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so they're always kind of they're always for a while. I know the first couple lectures are like those mysterious blue lines. What exactly do they do? Well, they're actually very powerful. Okay, so something to also keep in mind is that when you guys dimension using your annotative dimensions, remember those are just annotative. They won't have any effect on your model. So if you click on them, you're not going to be able to change them. Okay, questions before we move on to the next step? Good? Okay, so let's go back and let's see. That's not what I want. Let's go back to Canvas here. So we're going to skip, or before I skip creating a title block, were there any questions on that last assignment? Okay, good. If you have specific questions later, if you just ask me. Okay, but for the rest of the class, what we're going to work on mostly is creating storefronts and custom curtain walls. Okay, so that'll be the majority of this lecture. Okay, so if we go back to our Revit model, this is about what everyone should have at this point. Okay, so you should have you should have all of your interior walls, you should have all of your doors, and all of your exterior walls. Okay, so it should look something like this. Your materials might be a little bit different, but this is about what you should have. So what we're going to add today is we're going to add the glazing, the corner glazing to the corner of our building, along with some glazing on this side. Okay, so if we scroll down to step, actually the first step, you're going to notice that it says we're going to be creating a curtain wall. So we're going to create a curtain wall right here on this side of our building. We're also going to create one on this side right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how we're going to do that. So I think the assignment tells you to go to level 1. Okay, so I'm going to go to my level 1 floor plan, and it actually ultimately doesn't matter what level you go to, but I'm going to go to my level 1 floor plan, and I'm going to go up to architecture, and then I'm going to go over to wall, and then I'm going to click on architectural wall. Okay, and so if you go to your wall types, so far we've been working with all of the wall types that are kind of at the upper or the top probably 20, mostly with the generic wall types and wall types that we've created. But if you scroll down to the bottom, we're going to have a couple more wall types under the curtain wall category. Okay, so this is going to be all of your standard storefront glazing and curtain walls. So like things like this. This is all storefront glazing. All right, it's what you would put in front of like typical retail. A lot of office buildings have storefront glazing on, throughout the building. Okay, so that's what it is that we're going to be using. Okay, so we're going to go back and forth between curtain wall and storefront. Okay, I've actually created, because I've done this I did this last semester. I've already created a couple new storefront families for the different modules that we're going to create today. But you'll likely just see these 3 in your project. You'll see curtain wall, exterior glazing, storefront. They're all really exactly the same. Okay, a couple minor differences is when I use storefront. Okay, so I might click on storefront right now. You'll notice that I believe unlike curtain wall, you have a few more different adjustment parameters that you can use, but they're all going to have the same end result. Okay, so it doesn't really matter to me which one you decide to use for this project, but let's go ahead and start with storefront. So it's going to say curtain wall, storefront. And you'll notice that when you are drawing storefront, okay, let's just set up a couple basic parameters. We'll just say level 1 to level 2, that works. When you draw a storefront, you're always going to want to draw it through the middle of an existing wall, okay? So you might be thinking, where would I already have a wall here, but that's okay. So if I want to start my storefront right here, I'm going to go ahead and drag it, and I'm going to drag it out to my corner where I'm going to eventually stop it, okay? And then if I click down again, you'll notice that oops, sorry, let me minimize this real quick. Let me get back to where I was. Let me pick one that I've already actually created. Let's try this one. Notice that when I click down and I start my glazing, and then I click again, see, highlighted walls overlap, one of them may be ignored. Sorry, of course it doesn't do what I want it to do. Let's try curtain wall. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that again. Okay, an insert in the main model cannot be hosted by, okay, I know what the problem is. So, one more time. All right, let's do it over here on this wall for now. So I'm going to go ahead and click down. I'm going to drag my mouse and notice that that wall embeds into the wall that we've already created, okay? That's typically how you want to use your storefront. You don't always have to. And if you look back to our previous lectures, we've actually done a couple other steps to where we've actually created the space for those windows. You can do that, and sometimes you'll run into problems with how the walls join where you'll be forced to do that, but you don't have to. So actually just embedding it in the wall is a good option, and I'll show you why. So you'll see that I've drawn this window unit here. I'm going to go ahead and go to 3D, and what you'll notice that if I select this, if I select that storefront that I just created and I make it smaller or larger, okay, maybe we just kind of push and pull this a little bit, you'll notice that the walls around it go back to the way that they were, okay? So no matter what size that storefront is, it'll always adjust the surrounding walls accordingly. So it's a nice feature of that storefront. So if you draw it one time and you realize that, okay, maybe it's not exactly what I want, you can start to push and pull it, and the surrounding walls will just infill as you do that, okay? If you do that in an area like this over here, you're not going to have that liberty. You're going to have to go through and manually adjust those walls to fill in those remaining gaps, okay? So that's how you're going to start to draw that storefront, okay? So let me go back and let's start to create the storefront for this corner over here, okay? So I think if we go to our exercise, it starts over here. So we have 17 feet, okay? It's going to tell me something that's actually not going to tell you, because a little bit later we're going to look at a topic called design options. What that allows you to do is to create a couple different options and how that might look, so that, let's say I'm talking to my boss and I say, you know, we have this corner glazing, but there's a couple different ways that maybe I could see myself doing it. So you can create a couple different options to where you can click a button, it'll toggle the options back and forth. So you could say option 1, show it to them, and you can click on option 2 and it'll show you that same, so show you the second option. So we'll look at what that does a little bit later, or how we do that a little bit later. Okay, so I've already created those design options. I'm going to go back and redo this a little bit later so that you guys can see how that happens. But let's look at adding the storefront to this piece. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to Wall. I'm going to go to Architectural, and we're going to click on Storefront. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and type in 17 feet. Okay, and that will give us our storefront. So from here, if you go to your 3D, you're going to notice a couple things about this storefront. Right now, it's just a big old piece of glass. Okay, there's no mullions, there's no nothing associated with this glass. Actually, you know what? I have a better idea. Give me just one second. I'm going to open up an older Revit model of this that doesn't have the design options already implemented. Let's open up part 2. This will make the demonstration just a little bit easier. Okay, this looks better. This will work. So if you go over to Wall, again, I'm going to go over down to the bottom. Here now we have just the 3 different options. I'm going to click on Storefront, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that 17-foot piece of storefront. So I'm going to drag it over, type in 17 feet, and we'll get our storefront. Okay, so if we go to 3D, we can start to punch in some of the parameters of our of this particular task. We're going to go ahead and make this up to level 3. All right, so I'm going to click on that storefront, and I'm going to change the top constraint to level 3. Okay, and hit apply, and there we go. It goes right up to the top. So what we're going to learn today, though, is we're going to learn how to create custom grid options. Okay, so there's obviously a multitude of different ways to which that grid spacing could look on this piece of storefront. Okay, so if I click on this piece of storefront right here and I go over to edit type, let's look at the different options that we have in terms of adjusting the grid spacing, okay? So all you're seeing right here, again, is you're not seeing the mullions, okay? You're not seeing the mullions, but you're only seeing the grid lines, okay? We'll end up adding mullions here in just a few minutes, all right? So when you click on Edit Type, and I'm actually going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call this Storefront Option 1. Okay, because I want to be able to add a bunch of different parameters to this without affecting any other ones. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And if we go down to the third category, you're going to notice a category called Vertical Grid and Horizontal Grid. Okay, so any edits you make to the vertical grid is going to affect the spacing of your vertical grid lines. Okay, that you see right here. So we have 1, 2, and 3. And then under horizontal grid, you're going to notice that any changes that you make will ultimately affect the horizontal grid spacing. So looking at what we have right here, you'll notice that the vertical grid spacing says maximum spacing of 5 feet. So what that correlates to is the spacing of these grid lines, okay? So by it saying maximum spacing of 5 feet, what that's going to do is it's going to create a certain number of equal components. And over here, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll notice that under our individual type parameters that it says vertical grid 3. So I've established the number of grid lines that I want in my for my storefront. And under here, it says the maximum spacing is 5 feet. So it's going to create 4 equal components with a maximum spacing of 5 feet. So it'll make that spacing whatever it needs to, but the max will be 5 feet. Okay, so let's look at some of our other options though. So if we click down here under layout, we're going to have 5 different options to which we could choose from. You could either have no vertical grid lines. Okay, so maybe you want just like ribbon windows and you actually want no verticals. That could be an option. Okay, but the second one is going to be fixed distance. So if I click on that, I can actually specify exactly what the grid spacing will be for our vertical grid lines. So maybe we do, let's just type in 2 feet. All right, and we hit OK. Notice that now all of our spacing between our grid lines is 2 feet. Okay, and then we have a little remainder because that's just whatever the difference is. Okay. So you have a variety of different parameter options in terms of how you can get your storefront spacing. So that's going to be fixed distance. You also have an option to do fixed number. Okay, so you could say I want 8 sections. You can actually have that option in how you determine it. Ultimately, there are probably 3 or 4 different ways to which you can get the look that you're looking for depending on how you set up the parameters, okay? So while you guys are working today, you might kind of experiment a little bit on how you get to the end result, okay? So we have fixed distance, fixed number, maximum spacing, and minimum spacing. Maximum spacing, as I mentioned earlier, you define the number of bays that you're going to use, and it will make them as large as possible, but the maximum spacing will be what you define it as. Okay, minimum spacing would be the opposite, where you define the smallest it could be, and it'll make it as close to that as possible. Okay, horizontal, you'd have the exact same options to choose from. Okay, so let's go to our assignment and let's look at what it actually asks for this particular. For what it is that we're working on. So you can see here that we have, for this particular storefront, we actually have 4 bays with all equal spacing, okay? And then if you go in the horizontal dimension, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're gonna have a grid window of 4 by 8 panels, okay? So let's go ahead and create that. So I am going to change actually my vertical spacing. I'm going to change the layout to maximum spacing, okay? Because I want 4 equal panels, all right? I don't necessarily care what the spacing is. I just want them to be equal, all right? So I'm going to go to maximum spacing, and I'm going to choose, let's just type in like 2 feet. Let's just see what happens. I know this is going to be wrong. I'm purposely doing this. And I'm going to hit OK. So obviously we have way more than 4 equal spaces. So let's make that number even bigger. Let's try 4 feet. Okay, now I've got 5 equal spaces. So I can even make it a little bit bigger. Let's try 5 feet. This should do the trick. And now I have 4 equal spaces for our vertical dimension. Okay, right now for the horizontal grid, you'll notice that it says fixed distance 8 feet. Well, if you look in the background, what that's telling you is that from here to here is 8 feet. From here to here is 8 feet. And then above, it's going to be whatever the difference is. All right. So we want 8 equal spaces. All right. So again, I'm going to change this to maximum spacing. Okay. And I'm going to try, let's try like 3 feet. Let's see if that does the trick. Let's hit OK. And we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're close. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's try 2'6". All right, go ahead and hit apply. I think that did the trick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, wow. Wow, let's try an in-between number. Let's try 2'8". There we go. That's what we want. So now we have a 4 by 8 grid. So keep in mind that as you're doing that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the spacing of these modules are exactly 5 foot by 2'8". You're just saying that it doesn't matter what the size of that is. You just, as long as it's not bigger than those dimensions that you're providing. So you're just setting up, you're creating a group of parameters to which your model will kind of live by, or that particular storefront will work under. Okay, so from here, let's continue down on what some of our other options are for these type properties. Okay, so below horizontal grid, we have an option called vertical mullions. Okay, this will allow us to establish what type of mullions we have for all of our vertical grid lines. Okay, the first one is going to be interior type. What that means is you're going to select a mullion type for all of your interior grid lines. Okay, so that's going to be all of the grid lines between your borders. So that's going to be these 3 grid lines. Okay, so for here, I'm going to go over and I'm going to select a mullion type. I'm going to click on rectilinear mullion 1. Okay, and if I hit apply, you'll notice that I now have mullions on my interior grid lines. Okay. So if you go below that, you have border type 1. If we add, let's see, rectilinear mullion 1. So I'm going to add the same mullion type. I hit apply. Notice that what that did was it applied a mullion to border 1, which is going to be the border that you started drawing your wall at. So when I drew my wall, I started over here and I dragged the wall all the way to this side. That's going to be border 1. Okay, and then border 2 is going to be the other side. All right, so from there I'll click on rectilinear mullion 1, and I'll go ahead and hit apply, and now I have a mullion over here on this side. Okay, so going below that, we now have horizontal mullions, and that's going to work the exact same way. All of our interior mullions are going to be from here all the way up to this portion. So the reason why it gives you that option is you actually might want a variety of mullion types. The mullions on the borders might be nice bigger mullions that might be acting as posts or columns. So you might have like a 5" by 5" mullion, or maybe you have a 4" by 10" mullion, what have you. Okay, you can the main point is that you can create basically whatever configuration you want depending on what you need to do. Okay, so I'm just going to add, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to add the same rectangular mullion to all of my options. Okay, so rectangular mullion 1, and I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. All right, so now we have this nice grid window that we've created. Okay, so by establishing those different parameters, if I go through, and let me go back to my floor plan, and I start to draw, let's say you're drawing like a much larger building where maybe you have multiple instances that you want this exact same spacing. If I go over to wall and I go to storefront and I go to option 1, I can start to draw different segments of Storefront, and they're all going to have that exact same grid spacing. So if you're doing a large project and you have an overall design concept for what you want your storefront to look like, it's good to take some time to establish what those parameters are, so that all you have to do is just simply draw those storefronts just like you would any other wall, and all your Mulion spacings are going to be exactly the way that you want it. You know they're all going to be uniform, and you know they're all going to be the same. Okay, so let's look at some of our other storefront options. Okay, so if I click on that storefront, these are going to be the individual. Now we're going to look at some of our individual type properties. Okay, so if you go down, you're probably familiar with all of the constraints. We have our base constraints and we have our top constraints. Okay, and then if you go below that, you're going to notice that we have some constraints for both the vertical and the horizontal grids. Okay, the first one is justification. Okay, so what that means, you're going to have the option between beginning, center, and end. And to make this a little bit more clear, let me draw another storefront, and I'm going to choose one that's not the one that we just created, because that's actually correct. But let's actually use this one right here. Let me move it a little bit, and let's look at what some of those options are. Okay, so for the one that I just created here, let's click on it, and let's look at the vertical grid. So if you look at justification, the first option is beginning. What that means is it's saying for that grid spacing that you've established over here under your type properties. So for example, if I change the vertical grid to, let's change it to fixed distance of 5 feet. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Okay, so what that's telling you right here under vertical grid, under justification, is where does that 5 feet start? Okay, for right here, it's saying we have it selected as beginning. So it's saying that that 5 feet is starting at the beginning of where we created our storefront. So it's going to go 5 feet, 5 feet, 5 feet. And then that difference, that little sliver of, a couple feet of storefront, is going to be at the end. But notice that if I change this to end, what do you think it's going to happen?
Switch the side of space.
It's going to switch the sides, exactly. So you're choosing where you basically want those parameters that you originally set. You're choosing where you want them to start. Okay, and if I click on center, it's actually going to evenly distribute that. So it's going to put the 5-foot modules in the middle, and it's going to evenly separate the boundaries. Okay, so that's going to be the justification. Now you also have angle. So if you wanted to change the angle of your grid lines, you could do that. Although I never do that. I can't say I've ever actually had to do that. But if you wanted to, you could change the angle of those grid lines. Why you'd want to do that? You probably wouldn't do that in most architecture. But if you're doing something kind of fancy, I'm sure you could think of something kind of cool that you could make some angled mullions. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the offset. Okay, this will be a little bit easier demonstrated for horizontal. Let me change my horizontal fixed distance. Let's change that to, I'm going to change that to 3 feet. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because let's say we're creating a module. A typical storefront module might look something like this. So from the retail that I design, I might have, so if I'm doing a retail storefront, let's say that piece of storefront is, we'll say that's 12 feet, okay? Well, when I do retail storefront, I always have the top of that door at 7 feet, so it's gonna go 7 feet, that'll be 7, and then I might have 2.5-foot module, two 2.5-foot module clear story windows above that, okay? And then you might have your doors, etc. Okay? So let's look at how we might do that. All right, so what I might do is here, I'm going to create the horizontal grid spacing. I'm actually, instead of creating a 7-foot spacing, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to type in a 2.5-foot spacing, because that's what the spacing of all of the transom windows above are going to be. I'm actually going to make that 2.5 feet, hit apply, hit OK, And then under here, under horizontal offset, I'm going to type in 7 feet. Okay? What that does is it's saying, I have a group of parameters. I want that spacing to be 2.5 feet, but I wanted that to start at 7 feet. So you're basically creating a starting point for where that where those type properties will begin. Okay, so that's what the offset will allow you to do. So if you don't want that that rule that you created, if you don't want that to start at a particular point, you can add an offset and actually adjust that starting point of where that spacing might begin. Okay, any questions about any of that? Good. Okay, so we have type properties for our storefronts, which you'll find here. And then you also have your individual type properties. Mostly what you'll work within is going to be the vertical and horizontal grid system right here. Okay? So I'm going to delete that. And let's move on to the next portion of this assignment. Okay? So if we click on this assignment, it says select the curtain wall grid and unpin it to move it to change the distance. Okay, so if you click on your storefront that you just created, you'll notice that it's going to be a little bit difficult to modify that grid spacing if you want to modify it in any way that's not a part of the overall grid. Okay, if you want to break that grid, if you want to do something kind of custom to it, you'll notice that Revit makes it kind of difficult, but there are workarounds that we can do to fix that. So let's look at this in pure elevation. And what we're going to do is you'll notice that if you select any of the components of this storefront system, you're going to get this little, what looks like a pin, okay? And what that means, right now, everything is pinned together. So it's all, it's all, you created all of these properties that defines what this storefront looks like. Well, they're all pinned together. Revit doesn't want you to kind of alter that. So, but let's say you want to actually do that. Let's say you want to maybe make, you want to change an individual component of this storefront. Well, if I click on that Mulion and I click on that little pin, it will now allow me to make some adjustments to that. So if I click on that Mulion, notice that up here in your properties dialog box, it's grayed out. It's saying that it doesn't want you to change it because it's all a part of the overall system. But if I unpin it, I can now change that Mulion to whatever I want. Okay, so now I have a circular Mulion. All right, but let's look at how we might shift that. We're going to kind of break the overall grid system that we've created. So if I hover my mouse over one of these Mulions and I hit the tab button, I'm going to keep hitting tab until right there I now can select that grid line. Okay, so I now have the grid line that is behind that Mulion. Okay, so if I select that grid line, I can then unpin the grid line and I can now actually alter the spacing of my overall grid. Okay, so in the assignment, you're going to notice that it tells you to change this spacing to 1'10". Okay, well, if you tried to select that grid line and you didn't unpin it, it wouldn't let you change that spacing because it's all constrained amongst the parameters that you've set. But by unpinning it, it will allow you to then select your witness lines, and I can now change that spacing to 1'10". Okay, and that will shift just that grid line over while also retaining the parameters that you've set for that spacing. Okay, so that's going to be how you break the grid system on the storefront that you're creating. All right, so the next step of this is going to be to edit the curtain wall profile like so. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go ahead and create it in that shape using the different. I'm going to go ahead and use my pick lines tool on the locations that they're showing here. Okay, so I'm going to select my curtain wall, and just like a regular wall, I'm going to click on Edit Profile, and then from there, I can pick the edges of my Mulion. Okay, so it actually may not. It's actually not going to let you select the edge of your Mulion. It's going to only let you select the grid line, but I can go ahead and draw that line. I'm going to draw that line. I'm going to snap to the edge of that Mulion. I'm going to draw it up 5 bays, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go over. Okay, what tool should I use to kind of clean up these boundary lines? What was that? Thought I heard it.
Trim.
Yep, we're going to use our trim tool. So I'm going to go up to trim, TR. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on the lines that I want to keep. Okay, so click, click, and I'm going to click and click, and I've now defined a new boundary for my curtain wall. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark, and you'll notice that we have something that looks like that. Okay, that's okay. That's what we want. It looks a little funky, but it'll all come in place a little bit later because we're going to end up adding a fireplace and some other different objects. But that's going to be how you get to that particular step. If you guys get to a point where you notice there's like this little sliver of wall right here, that's okay. Just select the actual wall, hit edit type, and just move that little boundary line to line up with the edge of your curtain wall. Okay? So now if I hit check, you're not going to see that line, or you're not going to see that little tiny sliver of wall. And this might be a little bit different for everybody, just depending on how accurately your project is drawn. But you know, as you can see here, I probably drew it where I'm just like an inch or two off. So I just see a little sliver of wall left. So being that I want to get rid of that, I'm going to select the wall. I'm going to go to Edit Profile, and I'm just going to move it. I'm going to move the edge of that wall just to the inside, or just to align with the edge of my storefront. Okay? So go ahead and hit check. And then now we don't see that. Okay? Everyone see how we got that? So let's look at just a couple more things for this particular wall and how we might edit this. So I'm going to look at this in pure elevation. Let's look at some of the other pieces that we can edit. So notice up here we have a couple different situations. We have a mullion actually being broken up by a vertical mullion. Okay? If I click on that upper horizontal mullion, you're going to have a couple buttons up here, one called Make Continuous and one called Break at Join. Okay? Well, if I click on Make Continuous, you'll notice that it now makes that outer boundary mullion 1, which is ideally what you would have. You would have the outer boundary mullion would be one continuous mullion. So you actually do have the ability to actually go through and start to edit these tiny little individual portions of this storefront. Okay, just an extra little way to customize it even a step further than what we originally had. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next portion of our assignment. What we're going to do is we are going to create this small segment right here. Okay, we're going to create the other segment. All right, so I think it should be, we're going to go to level 1, and we're going to go ahead and draw this from right here. So again, I'm going to go to wall, and I'm going to go to option 1, and I'm going to edit type, and I'm actually going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this option 2 because I'm actually going to do something a little bit different here in a sec to this storefront. Okay, but for now I'm going to go hit OK. Right now the parameters are exactly the same. Option 1 and option 2 are exactly the same. All right, so from here I'm going to go ahead and draw that wall, and I'm going to align it with our corner of our old glazing. You're going to notice that by doing that by default, Revit, whenever you join glazing in Revit, it always makes a really kind of awkward budding condition, okay? And you'll notice that right now, I'm actually kind of getting that. You're gonna notice that Revit doesn't really like to join those walls, okay? It's actually not even letting me, it's not allowing me to join them right now, okay? And if you look at it in 3D, you know, we have this weird condition where we have two rectilinear mullions trying to butt up against each other. So I'm going to select this. Let's change our top constraint to level 3 so that those align. Okay, but what we need to do is we need to kind of figure out a way to clean up this corner condition right here. Our ultimate goal is for it to look like this, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a post to the corner of our glazing. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this, and I'll go through both ways. Okay. The first way is you could actually physically add a post to this. So what I would do is for this storefront, I would go over to my edit type, and under vertical mullions, border type 2, because remember that's the second border. I'm actually going to change that to none. Okay, I'm going to change that to none, and I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to go ahead and hit delete mullions. Okay, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, notice that it now has deleted the mullion on that side of our glazing. Okay, it looks something like that. All right, I'm actually going to do the exact same thing to, actually let's just change that to option 1. Delete mullions. Okay, so now we have a condition that looks like this, but we're still kind of left with, let's flip-flop that. Okay, let's make sure our glazing is properly aligned, but we still have an awkward condition where this doesn't want to join. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this little blue dot here, and we're going to click on disallow join. Okay, so by doing that, that actually allows me to drag this wall and it won't be affected by any of the other walls. It will allow me to drag it to whatever location I want. Because originally what was happening was Revit was kind of sensing that it was kind of an awkward condition and it wasn't allowing it to join. But we actually want it to join up as close as possible. I'm going to do the same thing here, right click, disallow join, and I'm going to make them, yep, just like that. So, but what I'm going to do, let's fix our wall real quick, edit profile, let's just move this over a little bit more. There we go. So now we have a space to where we could put that post, okay? So if I go over to my floor plan again, I could then go over to structure, and I'm going to go to column, and I'm going to, actually, sorry, let's go to architecture, and let's go to column, and let's go to architectural column. And I'm going to create a rectilinear post, and let's start with 18 by 18. Let's go to edit type. What would we do if we want to make a different post? Yep, duplicate. Yeah, I know we all know this. Let's go to duplicate, and let's make this, let's just double check what the dimension is of this. Let's make a post that is 5 inches by 5 inches. I want to go to column, architectural, edit type, duplicate, and let's call this 5 inch by 5 inch. Hit OK. And then from there, I can edit the dimensions of the post. Let's call this 5 inches, the depth 5, and let's also make the width 5. And I will hit OK. All right. And then from here, I can go ahead and place this post right here at the juncture of our two mullions. Okay, or I'm sorry, of our 2 storefronts. From there, I can click on it. I can make sure my base constraint is level 1, top constraint is level 3, and bada bing, bada boom. The only problem is that our material is not correct. Let's change our material to, let's change it to aluminum to match our storefront. Okay, so that looks good. That's what we're trying to make it look like. Okay, we have a nice corner condition, nice corner clean glazing, abutting up to each other. Okay, let's look at the second way that you could do this. Okay, I'm going to delete that column, and for this storefront, for storefront 1, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to edit type, and I'm going to change border type 2. I'm going to change that to a quad mullion. What that is it's just an equal 5 inch by 5 inch mullion. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Hit OK. Okay, let's go ahead and just scoot this back for now. I'm then going to select this storefront. I'm going to drag it out. Sorry, I actually want to drag it out to the center. Okay, notice that it just snapped to the center of my other wall. I can then go to my other one. I'm going to change this to option 2, and I'm going to go over to edit type, and I'm going to change my border type 2. What would I change this to?
None.
None. Yeah, I'm going to change this to none. Hit apply, hit delete mullions, hit OK, and I can now drag this over to my other mullion. Okay, so both options are okay. All right, both options are okay. They're both going to get you the exact same outcome. Whatever way you want to do it is fine. Okay, but that's how you would do that. I think the assignment actually tells you to do the latter option that I just did. It tells you to change the different mullion types. Okay, any questions about that at all? Okay, let's, I want to do, we still have a few more things we could talk about in terms of storefront. Let's look at curtain walls. So we're now going to look at how we could create more of a custom curtain wall type. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my floor plan, and let's delete these. And I'm going to go to wall, and I'm going to go, instead of storefront, I'm going to go to curtain wall. Okay, and let's just make sure I got nothing here. Good, this all says none, which is what I want. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drag that out again, just like we did before. Okay, and what the message that I just got was, it said that two walls are overlapping. So what I could do, if that happens, actually, if that happens, what I could do is I could click on this wall, and I'm going to click on cut geometry, and I'm going to click on what I had before. Actually, I'm going to click on what I want to cut first. So I'm going to go to cut, click on the wall first, and then I'm going to click on my storefront, and you'll notice that it cuts the difference out of each other. Okay. Another option that you could do is actually probably the better option. If I go to level 1 and I'm going to go over to curtain wall, is under edit type, I'm going to select the button that says automatically embed. Okay, so when we created our storefront earlier, that button was checked, so it'll automatically embed in the wall that we're creating. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click. Notice that it automatically embeds. Okay, so I didn't have to do the cut task. I can change the top constraint to level 3. Okay. And what we're going to do now is we're in a situation where we can create a very customized storefront. You'll notice that right now we have a 17-foot by like 30-foot piece of glass. Well, we know that's not realistic. That's not going to really work. So let's actually create our own. Okay. So I'm going to look at this in pure elevation. And instead of establishing parameters over here under our properties dialog box, I'm going to go up to architecture. And I'm going to go over to where it says curtain grid. Okay, I'm going to click on curtain grid, and I will actually define my own grid. So this actually allows you to do something like, if you really wanted to create something really intricate, okay, maybe you wanted to do something like this, where you have a storefront, and maybe you want to do something where you have like that, but then over here you have, like that. You want to make something much different than your typical just grid window. So you actually want to make some real customized pieces. What you can do is you can go over, after you've built that curtain wall, you can go over to architecture, okay, and then you're going to click on curtain grid, and you can start to establish all of those grid points, but you can do it manually. Okay. Obviously, the quicker way is to have a very orthogonal, very basic grid system, but you will come to a point where you probably want to create something very custom and very unique. So if you want to do that, you can click on curtain grid, and you'll notice that if you click on modify, you have a couple different options. The first one is all segment, and the other one is one segment. Okay. So for all segment, you'll notice that. Let me just place a few of those down. So we'll say 4 feet. I'll just kind of create some random ones for now. Okay. So that's going to be all segment. Will always go from the bottom to the top. Okay. No matter what. So I can go ahead and place some horizontal grids. Okay. And then one segment will actually do the same thing, but it's only going to be one segment in between another set of grids. Okay, so that's where you could really start to customize, what some of these pieces might look like. Okay, so I'm not going to do this for a while, but you can kind of see what how you might do that. All right, so that's going to be how you start to establish a custom grid system. When you're doing that, something that's kind of cool, let me get it back to one large piece of glass. When you click on curtain grid, you'll notice that as you are moving the grid, you're moving your cursor down on the bottom and on the edges of your curtain wall, it will snap to certain dimensions. Like right now, it just snapped to the midpoint. It's what Revit's doing, it's assuming that I want to create 2 equal segments, okay? It'll also do that for thirds, okay? So if I move it over, it should snap, come on.
How is it? It's like 1/3.
Right there. Okay, so it's snapping to the third, right there. 5, 8, 5, 8, 5, 8. So it'll also snap to the thirds, okay? So if you hover your mouse over there and if you're looking for exact dimensions, it will do that for you, okay? So let's put a couple grid lines on there. Let's see what the next step might be. I'm just kind of creating something kind of a little bit unique, okay? So once you establish your grid system, you're then going to go over to Mulion, okay? You can go over to Mulion, and then you can start to select the different grid lines that you've created and add the mullions however you wish, okay? And then let's say you want something a little bit different. If you want to add a quad corner, you can do that same thing, okay? You can start to add whatever size mullion to whatever location you want, okay? And just like your grid lines, you can also do grid line segment, or maybe you don't want to place a mullion on the entire grid line. You can start to place them on individual segments, okay? And the last option is all grid lines. You'll notice that, let's go back to our beginning. If I click on all grid lines, I can then just select my curtain wall and it will place that mullion that you have selected on every single grid line. Okay, so that's how you could create a custom curtain wall. Okay, let's take it even a step further. This is a big topic today. Let's take it a step further and let's say that you want to create your own mullion. Okay, let's say that the mullions, the default Revit mullions that we have in place aren't going to work for you. Okay, let's say I think this default one is 2.5 inches by 5 inches, but let's say maybe you want your horizontal mullions to be, something a little bit different. Okay, or let's see your vertical. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's backtrack a little bit. I'm going to, let's go to architecture. I'm going to go over to Mulion, and I'm going to go to edit type, and then let's say I want to create a 1 inch by 5 inch mullion. I'm going to duplicate this. Let's call it 1 inch by 5 inch mullion. I'm going to hit OK, and then from here I can go ahead and adjust some of those parameters to create a custom mullion type. Okay, so the first one's going to be thickness. Thickness will be the actual depth of the mullion. So if we look at this mullion right here, the thickness is going to be from this face to the outside face on the exterior. So that's probably like 4 or 5 inches. So I'm going to leave that at 5 inches. And then under dimensions, it says width on side 1 and width on side 2. What that's referring to is the width of the mullion on one side of the grid line and the width of the mullion on the other side of the grid line. Now I can't say I've ever had a situation where I've wanted unequal amounts of it, but you do have that option should you need to do that. Okay.
Side 1 going to the interior or to the exterior?
Side 1 is going to be, it's not interior or exterior, it's just left or right. So side 1 is going to be on, I think, the left, and I think side 2 is going to be on the right. But I guess we'll find out in a second. But let's say I want a 1 inch thick mullion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do 0.5 inches on one side and 0.5 inches on the other side. Okay, I can then hit OK. And now if I go over to my curtain wall, you'll notice that I've created a new custom mullion type where that is now only 1 inch thick. Okay, so you can see how you could really start to customize a piece of storefront if you want to. There are really easy and efficient ways of doing it, like we started with. And if you wanted to create a really cool custom curtain wall for maybe you're doing like a civic building or something like that, you have that option as well. Okay, so you can make it as easy or as complicated as you'd like. Any questions about those steps? Good? Okay. Let me go back to I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Let's go back up to, let's see. So we've looked at embedding into existing walls. We've looked at adjusting the grid using wall properties, both horizontal and vertical grid patterns. We've also looked at how to manually adjust the grid by unpinning, okay? Let's see, selecting individual curtain wall elements, including mullions and panels. We've looked at that. Oh, we didn't look at panels. Let's look at that. Okay, so let's go to let me add some mullions really quickly to this whole segment. So just like we did before, remember we talked about using the tab key to tab through, to cycle through items that are really closely related. Well, just like Mulion, so you're definitely gonna run into that when you're working on storefronts, because if I hover my mouse over these, this Mulion, for example, it doesn't know if I'm trying to select the Mulion, am I trying to select the grid line, or am I trying to select the actual pane of glass? And you could do all three of those. So I could select the Mulion like so, or I could hover my mouse over, I could hit tab. That is now asking me, do you want to select the entire thing? I could hit tab again, and I'm now selecting the grid line. I could hit tab again, and I can now select the actual individual panel, okay? I can actually alter individual pieces of glass if I wanted to. So, if you wanted to get kind of crazy and, maybe you had, and I actually do see this in real life, you might want to change the different panes of glass. I've seen it so that you might have like an artist come in and maybe you have something that does this. If you really wanted to do like a clear glass, you might have like a gray glass, you might have like a blue glass, green glass. You could start to kind of create like a, mosaic. If you really wanted to, you could do that. Okay, so right now we just have a standard glazed panel in place, okay? So I don't need to unpin that because I'm actually creating, when you're creating a curtain wall, you don't need to unpin it because it's a custom panel from the get-go. But if I wanted to, I can go to edit type, and right now this panel is simply 1 inch thick and the material is glass. But if I wanted to change it to something else, I could duplicate my glass. Maybe we call this glass gray, and then from there I could go up to appearance. I could change the color to gray. I want to add a tint to it, I could do that. I could hit OK. What did I do wrong there? Yes. Good. I'm glad you guys noticed that. No, that's exactly what I did wrong. So let's change this back real quick. Let's go to clear, no tint, apply. All right, so glass gray, duplicate this asset, thank you. And we're gonna change this to gray. And let's apply the tint and hit apply, okay, okay. Okay, so why did it change all of them? Good question. So if I click on my storefront right here, you're gonna notice that under edit type, let's see. Oh, I know why. Let's go back. So if I'm going to select that Mulion, let's select that panel. Okay, so what I did not do, if I went to edit type, I actually did not duplicate. I did not duplicate that panel. So that's going to be glazed. I'm going to call this glazed gray. Okay, I'm going to hit OK. And let's go select that gray panel. Duplicate the asset. Let's make that gray. Tint. Apply. Okay. So now that particular, I'm actually selecting a different type of panel. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now if I deselect, I now have a, I can now make a custom color for that panel if I wanted to. Okay? So hopefully you're starting to understand how you might create some of these custom pieces. So let's keep going down the line. We talked about creating the corner glazing condition for the residence, so you guys should be good with that. We talked about adding additional grid lines in Mulions. We talked about creating custom panel shapes, so we talked about how you could create a variety of different sizes and shapes. We talked about editing glazing materials, so we showed you how to edit that glass. Last but not least, before we go to lunch, let's talk about how to embed doors into storefronts, okay? We'll talk about design options when we get back. All right, so let's talk about how we might embed a door into a storefront. So what you're gonna do, unlike a regular door, it's a little bit different. You can't go to your floor plan, you can't go up to door and select one of these doors here it's not going to embed within that storefront. That will only embed in walls. Okay, you actually have to embed a specific type of door into a storefront, and how you do that is a little bit different than your average door. So let's say that I want to put a door in this panel right here. Okay, so the first step is going to be you have to define the panel size. So if you want a 7-foot by 6-foot double door, you're going to want to make sure that this pane of glass is 7 by 6. Right now it's probably a little bit different, okay? But that's okay for the demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this bottom mullion, okay? Because if you're going to walk through a door, you're not going to want to trip over a mullion, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tab through so that I can select that pane, and instead of changing the glazing type, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit Type, and I'm going to go to Load, and I'm going to go over to Doors, and I'm going to select one of these doors that says Door Curtain Wall. So what it is, it's not an actual door, it's actually a replacement for a curtain panel. Okay, that's how you're going to get a door inside of your curtain wall. So I'm going to click on Double Storefront Glass. That'll work, why not? Open. I'm going to go ahead.
Duplicate it at first? Is that going to change all the...
No, because I actually loaded, I loaded a totally new family.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. And now I have a door where that panel was. And you're probably thinking, well, where are my door handles? The only way you're going to see your door handles if you go down to Detail Type and you change that to Fine. You'll see your door handles. But that's going to be how you embed a door into a storefront system. Okay? So let's pause right there. Let's go to lunch. Right now it's 12:06, taking 45 minutes. Let's come back at 12:50. Okay? So we'll see you guys at 12:50. We're going to talk about design options for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and go to lab for the rest of the class, the rest of the day.